Welcome to the Startup Grind.
I was born in Romania, and I've been living the first 24 years of my life there. I was studying, I went to university, I was working at a radio station, I was a radio star in a previous life. And then I moved to Switzerland in 2000, and suddenly my world changed, because when you arrive here, even if you speak 2 or 3 languages, you worked at a radio station and you have a university diploma in languages, doesn't help you much. So then I had to push the reset button, and it was a moment of fear at first, fear that I will never be able to find something or to make it, but actually, now of course in hindsight, I think this is where I got in touch with my entrepreneurial side, which was there, but it kind of forced me to move into, kind of take a creative approach to
move
life.
Outside of the box.
Completely move outside of the box.
So
and,
as a kid, you didn't feel any entrepreneurs. A lot of people that we have on stage that we talk to who are successful entrepreneurs and founders, as a kid they were doing something crazy already, or selling gadgets or electronics or something to your classmates. But for you, was that? In
hindsight, there were signs, but you have to imagine that I was born in Romania during communism, so part of my childhood was in rather, difficult conditions from that point of view. And that being said, the entrepreneurial spirit was there, because even though even books or music, listening to Beatles, for example, was prohibited, there was a black market. And quite early on, I remember my father, so quite early on as a child, on the one hand, it was really scary because you were not supposed to talk about things like this. But on the other hand, you kind of felt that there are ways, even if the environment around you is very challenging, there are ways to get to things. And that part of my life, again, as a child, you leave things differently because it's what you know. You cannot compare it to something else. So your childhood is based on your family and the people around you, and even though you may go through difficult situations, there's no way for you to compare it to something else. As you grow, of course, then you start learning that things could be differently, and growing up in such an environment helped me very early on to put things in perspective and also to appreciate things.
Did you have ambitions as a child of what you wanted to be?
Yes, I did. And it was one of the first signs of, thinking differently, I think, and having this entrepreneurial mind. Somehow we had these Russian magazines for kids. It was the only thing that you could get your hands on back then. And some of them were actually translated in English or in French. And again, it was not easy to read or to learn. But somehow I came across this woman and her story of being a neurosurgeon, and that fascinated me. So in my head, quite early on, it was, this is what I want to become, Well, this is not where I am today, but the aspiration was there, and my parents were quite shocked, because it's like, where are you getting these ideas?
So after you came to Switzerland, is that when you started working with Evernote?
Oh, no, not at all. So when I came to Switzerland, I first had to figure out, in terms of employability, I was not very attractive, because back then even the university diploma was not fully recognized. And, working at a radio station in Romanian doesn't mean anything. It's just like nobody will care about it. So I thought back then when I arrived that probably the most natural thing to do is to move into communications, public relations, and I started from scratch. So I started with diplomas are super important here, as we all know, and you had to have the diplomas in order for you to get somewhere. So I really started with a very basic PR assistant course, like introduction to PR. And then moved on to doing all sorts of courses and having diplomas up to the, Executive Master of Science in Communications Management in Lugano. And the funny story about that is that, again, so I've done this education in communications, then I was working in a PR agency specialized in design and architecture, and it was only natural, it seemed natural to do the executive master because this is kind of it, right? So if you're in Switzerland and you're in communications, you're doing this executive masters in Lugano, and you know that you made it. And when I decided to do it, for me, the goal was mainly, back then it was very, very, like Facebook was just born. Twitter, nobody almost was using it, but it was kind of clear that something is going to change. So for me, the interest was to take the time, do the masters in Lugano, and focus on this up-and-coming digital communications. What is it all about? So that was really fascinating. And I was really lucky to be able to do some really interesting projects very early on in that direction. And I was quite happy, actually. I was happy because I had the master's degree and I had some interesting projects and I was not looking for a job. But then a friend of mine tweeted that Evernote was looking for somebody in communications in Europe. And back then, mind you, Evernote was a random, almost unknown startup. I happened to be an early adopter, a really early user. Somebody showed me the tool once and I just loved it and I used it on and on and on for the research projects and the other projects. And I just loved it. So when I saw this tweet, it was like, I have to be there, I have to try. And then it was really cool because what do you do, And I said, okay, I'm just gonna basically send an email and they will probably never reply. But then it went really fast, and I think this was the difference between the way we would go through getting a job here and the way it went with Evernote. And remember I was telling about the funny fact of getting the diploma in Lugano was related to Evernote not really caring what diplomas you had. So finally I spent all this time and money and energy and I had this shiny diploma and it felt like, like you're part of the lucky few. And then what they wanted was to know what you can do. I don't really care where you're coming from, what diploma you have. This is what we are trying to build, this is what we are trying to do. Let's try to do it. And when I first joined, basically my mission was, hey, we want to just build global PR for Evernote. Good luck with that, So today is your first day, so just go for it. And that was it. Okay.
So how long were you with Evernote?
Yeah, it was 5 years, which in startups years is a long time. I was a dinosaur, for sure, by the time I left. And Evernote was a magical experience on so many different levels. First of all, because I was one of the luckiest people to be able to join them when it was still a rather small team and see how it took shape and how it became this amazing global, startup and being able to work with so many inspiring and just brilliant people and having this bigger mission behind was just amazing.
So you were one of the first people in the Zurich office?
Yeah, so I was officially the first hire, but pretty soon we were a core team, and then we had, by the time I left, I think we were around 20 people doing, there was an engineering team doing development, but also everything that had to do with communications and marketing and sales.
So a lot of people here have their own ideas or their own startups in different phases, some are small, some are maybe a bit more growth as well. But part of every startup is eventually is growth and hiring people and taking that culture. And when you grow from 2 people to 5 to 10 to 20, were you involved, or what was your impression, or what are your experiences in keeping the core culture and that startup culture alive as you get to be bigger and bigger?
People and culture are everything. It is the deal breaker in the end. So if you're not able to have the right people on board, and by the right people, I mean people sharing the same values and the same vision of the world and coming there because they really feel they should be there. And keeping the culture alive, it's very challenging. So in the beginning, when you're just a bunch of people, 5, 10, or even 20, I think, you know, it's kind of very informal and casual and it's easier. But then as you grow, you need to be vocal about what is it that you're building here and how do we work together. And just as we see in the space today, this space breeds a certain culture. You know, you see the openness, you see the creativity, and this is extremely important. Because of my previous work in the PR agency for design and architecture companies, I am very much into design and architecture and inspired by spaces. And this was one of the fun things to do when we developed the office in Zurich, to think about, together with the team, interior design and how could we create a space that is inspiring, that feels, again, not like work in the proper sense. Right. And I think this was one of the biggest learnings with Evernote and with the team we had. For us, it was not work. And that is so powerful, because when you start looking at your life and you see, okay, what do I want to do with my life? And something I want to do in my life is to work with amazing people on things that matter. You know? I think this is just another level. So going beyond, of course, if we here in the developed world have the luxury maybe to see things this way, but having the possibility to say, I can actually choose to dedicate my life to things that I love, to things where I want to make an impact. And it's not always easy, you know, so you have to have the courage to take a step, and sometimes you're going to hit the wall, many times you're going to hit the wall, but then if you feel it deep down inside, if you stay true to yourself, and I think this is the DNA of an entrepreneur, right? You'll never settle. And currently you're working on We Are Play Labs. Is that, did you start that after leaving Evernote? Or did that come about right away, or was there a few things in between? So I'm working on a couple of things, and this goes back to my philosophy of life, which is, it is not a one-way street. You don't have to do one thing, and you can absolutely move in lateral moves. So instead of seeing this kind of, you know, up, you know, you're getting your job and titles and whatever, and you're climbing the ladder, you could actually see life as moving in these different projects, working with different people on topics that are interesting to you. And for me, this is actually, you know, it's a bit of a compound interest in the end, because the things that I have learned in all these different projects have helped me tremendously every time, on and on and on. So after Evernote, I was involved, I'm very close to the startup scene and an entrepreneur, so it's inevitable that I am part of different initiatives. And as a parent, I felt that education is something that we need to have a closer look at, right? So tell us the elevator pitch for We Are Play Labs. Accelerate positive change in early childhood development. Okay. Yeah, so this is our mission. And we are getting there by creating effective, convenient interventions for teachers, parents, and communities. Was there a specific event? So you have children as well. Was there something in your personal experience that triggered that? Yeah. So there are my kids, so being a parent is one thing, but I think also my personal experience of lifelong learning. because in the end also the fact of moving here, so if I would have stayed in Romania, I don't think I would have done all these things, because it was just the comfort of an environment you know. Again, you have your situation, you have a nice job, so why should you do something? And coming here and being thrown in the cold water a bit forced me to look at things differently. And lifelong learning was and is still today and is going to be the key to my personal development. So looking at this, then being, of course, very much concerned as an entrepreneur, as a parent, about the state of education today, for me, it was on one hand scary to start looking at it, because I'm not an educator, I'm not a policymaker, so what am I supposed to do? But on the other hand, entrepreneurs love big challenges. And this is the mother of all challenges, I think. This is really the thing. As you know, remember Nelson Mandela said that education is, he named it, the weapon to change the world. And I think it really goes down to, if we can somehow accelerate change in education, because it is happening, we can solve so many different other challenges. And I started with reading a lot of research and taking a closer look of what is it actually? What is the problem that we are trying to solve, right? What is it that is happening today? And the more I read, the more I realized that, again, the more we move from education to learning, a whole new world of possibilities is opening up. Because speaking of formal education, we can always wish for the systems to change, and that eventually is going to happen. But if we start looking at how children actually learn, and when we start asking ourselves, what are we preparing them for actually today? What is it that we want them to be? Mm-hmm. And how can we best support them in that? It's becoming a different conversations. And for me, that was enlightening. So the more I read and I got in touch with researchers and people who have been doing quite a lot of work in this area, the more I realized that, first of all, it's not only about big systemic change, but it's also about every single one of us being a bit more aware of which are those skills, how are kids learning best, and doing something about it, so taking small steps.
You talked about lifelong learning. So is We Are Play Labs focused on children and education for children, or across the spectrum, all the way to adults and all of us here?
For the time being, it's early childhood development, because it goes back to this idea of having a big impact. And I think earlier we start, hopefully the bigger the impact will be. And there's lots to do. There's lots to do, because kids are born, as you know, I mean, those of you who are parents or have, just kids in your families, kids are just creators and dreamers and believers, and it is important to foster that, and it is important to allow them to become who they are, to fulfill their potential. The more we do to acknowledge, again, the fact that it's just skills that they must have today, because they will be confronted with very complex situations in the future. And we, as parents, want the best for our kids. Well, educators want the same, and policymakers, they will also want the same. So one of the things that you come across the more you talk to people is everybody is united in a common goal. Everybody wants to support kids in the end. Nobody will say, oh, no, we don't want to do anything. But, of course, it is extremely difficult because of the system and all stakeholders involved, and there's no one single recipe that you can apply and then everything is perfect from one day to the other. So this is why for us it was clear that one of the biggest challenges is bringing these different stakeholders in the life of a child together and starting having these conversations together and prototyping and working. And entrepreneurs have a crucial role when it comes to transforming education because we are risk takers. We don't fear failure. It is not the same for somebody who has a certain title or is part of a certain organization, right? I think we can come and we can challenge the status quo and say, hey, you know, I'm not an educator, I'm just asking some questions because I don't understand why is it like this? Why is it supposed to be like this? And then asking those stupid questions, then you kind of turn upside down the model and you get to the core of what is it that we can do.
Is it more of a social impact concept or project? And are there other areas that you see disrupting? Or, because right now you're focusing on education and disrupting the system and the patterns that are there. Are there other areas that you're looking into disrupting as well?
Disrupting is a big word. This is why when you ask me for my pitch, I said accelerating positive change in education because change is already happening. We may be less aware, but it is out there. You know, so the question is, how do we make that happen faster? Because
so
it's
less
needed.
of a disruption, more of an acceleration.
Yeah, it's kind of an accelerated evolution because just by the nature of things, education is changing. So our role is to make it happen faster. We cannot wait 100 years for that.
And what can all of us do to help make that change happen or help accelerate?
It's first of all a question of being aware, again, of how do children learn best. And researchers will tell you that they learn best through play. They learn best when they are engaged, when they can relate things that they are learning with the actual environment. So this is things that I think we need to know. Then it's a question of understanding which are the skills that our children need beyond employability in the future, right? Because nobody knows what jobs will be coming up in 30 to 50 years from now. So how do we prepare them for a future where there's going to be a lot of unknowns, right? And this has to do with having that creative confidence and collaborating. Collaboration is key, and this is not a given. If you think about successful startups, again, it's a question of how do people work together. They have various backgrounds, usually it's very diverse teams, and they are able to make an impact because they master collaboration.
We have a question.
Sure.
I'm tied down with this, so I can't get up.
Shall I come to you, or?
No, you're also tied down.
I am.
I just want to know I need to come get you.
Okay, I can just do it very loudly. I think everyone can hear my voice. Can you explain a bit what you do at our Play Labs? I mean, what is like the business proposition there? And then also what you mean by early childhood. Do you mean like from birth or after 2 or? Yeah. Okay.
Sure. So at We Are Play Lab, and this goes back to your question about social impact, we are focusing on impact. So my idea was not, let's build a business, let's build an organization. So when I started looking at what is it that we can do as entrepreneurs, my first idea is how can we impact? How can we have an impact, right? And pretty soon it was clear that it's a question of bringing an interdisciplinary team together. So it's not us as entrepreneurs trying to develop tools in isolation for teachers or for parents, but it's a question of us entrepreneurs working with researchers, with designers, with engineers, educators, parents, communities, and together coming up with new ideas, right? And then exactly what you're asking, you know, like what do you do in practice? Because it's not enough just to talk about it and to explain these are the skills and this is what we need to do, but what do you do? So we started prototyping interventions that embody these skills. One example, last year, we have piloted a project that was developed by Professor Kathy Hirsch-Pasek at Temple University and her team, and her idea of transforming cities and spaces into learning landscapes, because our children, if you think about it, spend most of their time out of school. So even if, let's say, we would do an amazing job in reforming the curriculum and they have all these amazing environments in the school, most of their time when they are awake, they are out of school. So knowing that and knowing that learning doesn't happen only when somebody tells you, now you're learning, when you're sitting on a chair. But learning happens on ongoing basis every moment. Children learn from what they see around them. So then the question is, what do they see around them? What are cities, what are environments teaching them? And her idea was she's done a lot of work, and I can only recommend to have a look at Urban Thinkscape, for example. But one of the idea was to design a life-size board game that would, on one hand, help kids, intuitively learn very complex concepts related to mathematics, like fractions, and at the same time encourage collaboration and creativity. So we have piloted this life-size board game last year in Switzerland, and the feedback we've got was amazing, because once you create a space that allows children, educators, and parents to think differently, it is a game changer. So just doing a very small intervention where they can actually see, we had 2 dice, for example, for the board game, and one of them was with fractions, but it was intuitive, so they would just throw the dice and they would need to make sense of, halves and 3/4. And doing that helped children in groups where we have done this, who normally are not participating in the learning activity in the classroom, either because they are coming from, difficult environments, or there are different reasons. Suddenly they come to life and they participate, and they see that there is a different way of learning. So this was just one thing, and right now we are working with researchers from designers from SUPSI in Lugano, and supported also by the Science of Learning Lab at ETH in Zurich, to prototype learning activity on computational thinking beyond devices, specifically for the classrooms. This goes back to one of the things that we are asking ourselves is, how can we bridge the gap, when it comes to digital literacy? How can we make sure that we understand technology, and that teachers, but also children who are using devices these days, right, understand what is an algorithm? And it doesn't require much for you to understand basics of computer science if it is done in a way that is accessible and friendly. And anybody here, you don't have to be a computer scientist, but anybody here can understand that. And we need to make that happen, because if we don't, then what happens? People are afraid, people don't understand, we don't participate in the conversation around how technology should be developed, what it should do, or girls don't go into jobs or computer science or data science because they are afraid, because it seems very complex, or because there's these kind of cliches around them. So we need to kind of bridge a bit the gap there. And this is something we are working on right now. We are prototyping. It's a participatory design, open education innovation. So once we have done the first lo-fi prototypes that we are creating together with educators and with children and researchers and designers, then we will make it open. And the idea is for people to use it, to build on top of it, and to exchange. So we believe that, again, the power of people coming together, first of all, you have to give a basis for understanding, to share a common understanding, showing a bit what is possible, showing the possibilities, but then you will be amazed. We were amazed what children could create with this board game last year. once you open that door and you say, just go for it. Yeah.
Direction. So we have another question.
Yeah, my question would actually go into the direction of digitalization. So I mean, it's always a controversial debate between building on your strength and elaborate on your weaknesses within school. And today's school system still is really forced or really on the track of elaborate and improve where you're weak. But then in the meantime, we have digitally very connected youngsters who share homework, who share tasks within homework via WhatsApp and everything. So my question to you would be, do you look into this topic, and what would your thoughts be on it actually?
Yeah, when it comes to tools and what technology can do to support learning and education, there are a few changes, right? I've been involved in managing the launch of the Swiss Tech Collider last year, and you see a lot of startups coming in and developing these products, that you were mentioning before, helping children to learn better, to collaborate. And we definitely look into it, but it is not our main focus, because we realize that the most important challenge we have right now is mindsets, So changing the mindsets of the key stakeholders in the life of the child requires a lot of work. It is not exactly, So I wish, because first, of course, coming also from the tech side, you wish you could develop a nice product that you could put out there and it's going to solve the problem, but you pretty quickly realize that that's not going to be the case. So if you really want to have big impact, it is about mindsets. And it is about, again, on one hand, having these open conversations about what is it that we are looking at in terms of challenges in education, and on the other hand is also giving people unexpected, very simple ways to do something about it. And this is why we had this very basic intervention. It is just, we underestimate the power of simple steps taken by people every day. I don't know if that is somehow going around your question, but...
When you say focus on the mindset, so if I understand you correctly, that you would rather go on the track that you empower and educate your kids in their strength areas rather than focusing on that they get the whole variety of the skills.
I guess the question might be: Are you developing tools, or is your focus on children or on the educators?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that would simplify the question.
Well, to get to the children, you have to go through the educators and the parents and the communities. There's no other way. And we are focusing on a breadth of skills, so for us it is really important. So it's not about only, let's say, computational thinking or digital literacy.
You work with the children to develop concepts that will be implemented by the educators and by the parents?
It's a mix. So, for example, the computational thinking learning activity is co-designed with children because we want them to enjoy it and to learn as much as they can, but we cannot do something in the classroom without having educators involved, right? So we have, if you want, to work in parallel to make sure that this is okay, that educators understand also the concept, that they embrace it, that they believe in it, and they start creating. It's a bit tricky, but this is one of the challenges when you start doing something around, again, education and learning for children, is that you cannot get directly to them, right? You have to get many other people on board before you get there.
Yeah, going back to your experience on the subject of having diplomas and then being at Evernote, where they said, we don't really care about your diploma, what can you do? looking at the mindset of certain people. My son was at the Montessori school, which is literally just across the little hill here. And when throughout the years I was attending several meetings with other parents and so on, and I was always completely astonished, especially if there were parents who had kids in kindergarten age, that they would ask, yeah, well, can you guarantee me that my kid will go to the gymnasium? And I was there and I thought, what the heck is going on? This little guy can more or less walk on his own and has already the pressure coming from the parents, and this especially astonished me that they would, for one thing, choose a Montessori environment and then have this kind of mindset.
Yeah.
How do you go about this? Because I thought it was quite flabbergasted by it.
It's a question of all of us raising our voice and saying that this is not okay, in the sense that as a parent, you want your kid to be okay, right? This is the ultimate goal. You want to know that your kid will be okay. Also, when they grow up, you picture them happy and you know, in a nice environment, and this is what you aspire to give them. And because of the world around us, we are somehow under the impression that, again, it comes with a job title, it comes with a certain diploma. Whereas the ultimate goal would be to raise them as caring, responsible, fulfilled human beings. But there's a lot of social pressure around you, so what do? You feel like, you know. So it takes a lot of courage, and it's important for us, parents who dare to do differently, to come and say, you can do it differently. And you get all the research that is telling you that, again, play is so important in the life of the child, and by play I meaning not you telling them what to do or giving them exactly, you know, monitoring and helicoptering all the time, but it's really letting them to create, to build, to express themselves, allowing them to go in a direction. Of course, they need boundaries, and this is why we as parents, we need, you know, we have our role to play. But when it comes to making sure that they are being raised with this creative confidence, believing that they can be whatever they want to be in the future, it's super important. Because what happens, the more pressure you put on the kid, the more, you know, if they have to go to school, then they have to go to 10 classes of whatever because everybody's doing it, and then in the weekends they also have to learn Chinese, and then, you know, they have to learn coding now, so it is not the way to go. And this is up to us as parents to recognize that and to try to find different ways. But it's not easy because, again, there is a social pressure. As adults, we see the challenges to get a job, you know, to kind of create your path in life. And we would like our kids to thrive. And in our head is, okay, if I could only make sure that he's on that path, you know.
I think also circling back to what you mentioned about the entrepreneurial mindset, I think as parents that can also have a strong influence to say that there are alternatives. You can think outside of the box. And as you have experienced as an adult, as an entrepreneur, you've experienced, you know, the stability of not everyone, but a lot of the entrepreneurs have experienced the stability of a good job and the excitement and instability of a startup. And balancing the stability with the fulfillment, and sometimes you can mix and match and come up with a good solution. But like you said, I think, and I've experienced that as well, coming from outside of Switzerland and raising my kids here, having to know what you feel as a parent is best for your kids and not what the rest of society thinks. You have to take everyone's perspective into consideration, and but at the end of the day, you as a parent have to think about what's best for your kid and not just what society thinks. It's not society who's raising them, it's you as a parent.
Yeah, and it's a tough job to be a parent.
But it's very fulfilling, it's very exciting. And one more question over here.
What appeared for me is that you said right mindset and what's the wrong mindset?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And to be more explicit, I think it's about the mindset of change, so allowing change to happen, not being afraid, not holding on to what we know because it feels comfortable. Entrepreneurs have a lot to teach on that front. So the mindset of exploring, prototyping, it is not a given for adults who have not necessarily been, playing with concepts like design thinking or building startups. It may come difficult for you to actually open yourself up to the fact that you could start something, you could try, you could explore, and it may not necessarily work, but that's fine.
Yeah, but I think it has got a lot to do with pressure. It's the same thing about school.
Yeah.
Montessori, they say, can you guarantee kids come to the gymnasium? It depends how much pressure is on it that you do the gymnasium to have later on the possibility of having a successful life or a life that you love. So maybe it's more about taking pressure away than finding the right mindset.
Yeah, no, so I think definitely it has to do with taking the pressure away, and that pressure you can take away by having the pioneers, the innovators, people who dare to do it differently, getting out there and saying, it's okay, you can do it, it's different, and it's fine. You have families who decide to travel the world with their small kids. For example, there are people who dare to do things differently, and the more of them you see around you, of course, the more is opening up and inspiring and taking a bit of the pressure off you, but it's a very personal choice in the end. So again, the mindset, maybe just to clarify, so change, it has to do also with growth mindset, and this is something, unfortunately, in our environments, we haven't been used to that much. This idea that you can develop and grow and learn throughout your life. It doesn't stop. So if you want this idea of, okay, you start now with kindergarten and you go to primary school, then whatever, you go to the university, and then it's done. You made it. You have your diploma, it's okay. Well, actually, and this is who you are, because you are defined by the diploma and by the job that you're taking. If you start looking at things to this kind of growth mindset and you say, well, life is a journey, you will and can learn many different things and you can do many things along the way. The only thing preventing you from doing it so is here, so not opening up to those possibilities. And this is something that should be discussed more, the growth mindset. It is not that common.
These days have to grow up too soon?
They don't have to, but they are by the nature of things. They are exposed to, a lot of different complex concepts that they have to assimilate, and they are growing up soon in the sense that if I'm looking at my family or the stories that I've heard from my parents and my grandparents, the way their childhood was or how they are talking about it seem to be a bit more, seem to be longer, first of all, and then more relaxed in that sense because they had time to just be out and play and do what they wanted. And today there is a lot of pressure, as you said, so you have to start early already, like you're 3 years old and they're asking you, what is your...
But not only that, I think also the access that children have at such a young age to technology has its benefits. So my 3-year-old was already knew her way around a tablet, but then you look at my 12-year-old and she acts like a 15-year-old. The amount of information. So I think there's also a difference in growing up. They they are still children with too much knowledge that they don't know how to deal with, and that's of course a completely different topic. But it is I think the age of information has changed growing up in so many ways.
But it is our job as parents and as educators to keep the child in them alive forever, if possible. That is the best thing. And we have to listen more to our children. We have so much to learn from them. And the more we do so, the more we allow them also to develop in a way that is going to help them thrive in the future. And again, it's not a question of title or a job. That's not going to define your happiness or fulfillment or sense of meaning in life.
Slightly more practical question. It's non-profit, right? So I used to run the philanthropy initiatives for JP Morgan in Switzerland, and it's about 1,000 employees, and we worked with Ashoka for the social entrepreneurial sort of dating service, if you will, matchmaking service for mentors to be allocated. And probably 2/3 of those projects, or even 3/4 in some years, would come in and say, they're social entrepreneurs. The challenge was always the same. How do we fund this? How do we keep this sustainable? We have a team of 3, 4, 5 people who all want to eat and have a quality of life. What advice do you have for people who are looking at non-for-profits and working within that space?
At this point in time, I wouldn't have advice. I am in need of advice myself. And we are a bit building the plane as we are flying it. It's that mode, and it's a startup, Me personally, as you heard before, I had 0 experience with non-profits, for good or for bad. So for me, again, of course, you have to find a way to build this in a sustainable manner. And I believe, I really wish and I believe that we can get there with We Are Play Lab. But there's time required, first of all, to have a proof of concept, to start building things. So I didn't want to rush. What was very clear for me from day one was that I don't want to start building products to sell to people. It's not that way that I want to take. I really want to figure out what could make an impact. And if you make that impact, I strongly believe that the money is there. Of course, in the very early stage of a non-profit or a startup, you rely on grants, for example, it's just philanthropy. But my wish is to definitely go beyond that. And this is also exploring new business models, because that is much needed. And I strongly believe that in not such a remote future, we'll stop looking at profit and non-profit in that sense, because we need to take our social responsibility seriously as organizations, as citizens, and we should. It's also good for everybody. It's good for the organizations, for the people, for the world. Why shouldn't we? It's not easy. Again, we are still at the very beginning. We see with big corporations new models emerging, but there is a possibility. And I strongly believe that people will be okay to pay for something that makes sense and has an impact. And we are on our way to get there. This is the plan. But I had a different approach when it comes to not putting the box of this is how I want to make revenue to start with. Because for me, what matters first is showing that we can have an impact. Showing that we are able to do something, because if not, it's just about selling a dream or trying to sell products. And this is not something I aspire to do.
I love your idea about playing. For me, the difference between kids and grown-ups is grown-ups stop playing. So, what I think is important is that one doesn't put too much purpose into the game, and that it's more about giving space for experiencing, and maybe even giving it that way that the kids, even when they're grown up, they still play.
This is so important. I I've done quite a lot of design thinking work, and it was just food for the soul, because you get in this spirit of playing and prototyping and experimenting, and this is so rewarding. We should definitely have more play everywhere, everywhere. We should have playful environments and situations, and during our interventions there was absolutely no doubt that if you create those environments, children start blooming. They start learning. Even again, fractions is very unattractive as a topic and very challenging for them, we know that. And you see how they come with very creative ideas, with new ways of looking at it, just because you allow them to have that playful experimentation. It's so important.
Do you think culturally there are countries that are broadly getting like this now? I know the Scandinavian countries send kids to school at 6 or 7, and France has just reduced the mandatory age to 3. Korea, Hong Kong, you're kind of spending additional hours in tutoring and very high, suicide rates among school kids. Who is doing it right just now?
That's a very good question. We have been talking to different organizations who are looking at surfacing innovations, education innovations around the world. And of course you have the classic examples of Finland and so on. But then what is really interesting is that innovations are coming from the most unexpected places. And you have this whole idea of leapfrogging in education that is common for us, especially in the tech world. We have seen with emerging markets where, instead of, let's say, they would not use computers as we had them 20 years ago, they just jump to what we have today. So the same idea with education. And in terms of countries, again, it's always, what are you looking at? Are you looking at what is the measure of success in education, right? Is it how the well-being of the children? Is it how employable they are in the future? It's a very complex discussion. So it's really tricky. We embrace the vision of the world again where we want children to fulfill their potential. And maybe their potential is not to go to Stanford, Maybe their potential is to be a football player or to be a drone costume designer, Maybe their potential is something else, and that is fine, that is totally okay. So in that sense, we admire systems and countries who support children, develop this breadth of skills, and give them the environments where they can develop this. Finland, as we've seen, has quite some good examples. And in Switzerland, again, depends where you're going, there are differences. And one of the things that I need to say is that being engaged with educators and traveling from school to school for our interventions, we have discovered also here extraordinary examples of innovations, of teachers just deciding to do things differently in their classroom, of having entire schools who have a different culture. And that is really great.
So, if you could do, or what advice would you give to a young you, just backing up a little bit from what we were talking about, what advice would you give to a young you?
Well, the young me, I would say, embrace your true nature, because I tried to fit in for quite some time. And as a parent now, I think this is one of the biggest missions, and the challenge I have is to make sure that I give this confidence to my children. So be confident to embrace that little voice inside of you who's telling things, who's trying to tell you, hey, dare more, or try more, or even if it sounds crazy. And for me, that would be, I think, the most important thing, because I was stuck for quite a long time because I was afraid to disappoint or to get out of the box, or, you know. And then I was pushed to do it without wishing for it. And then once I've done it, going to the other side, there was no turning back, and I'm very happy.
And what advice would you have for female founders, or to encourage more female founders, or the topic of diversity? So the whole topic of diversity is often a bit sensitive. Some people like to campaign it, other people think it's one of those things we shouldn't have to talk about, but obviously we do in order to make it more reality. So there's different perspectives, different approaches, but the fact is we need more female founders, we need more diversity in businesses and startups, to having a diverse team. There's so many benefits. What can you tell us about that?
We need, and not only that we need, but again, in terms of fulfilling their potential, just dare to do it. You know, it is important. It is important to have diversity. It is important to see that we support women, men as well, who want to change, want to make things happen. And it has to do a lot, again, with giving that confidence and showing that it is possible, and helping and taking off the societal pressure on failure, because this is key. And we are not that advanced, although we have started talking about it's okay to fail. But in reality, if you start something, it's not working, the pressure and the reputation and the stigma is there. And we need to do much better. We need to make sure that we create, again, these playful learning environments for everybody, and we give people of all backgrounds the possibility to try, to work together, to explore. And my hope is that by starting very early in the life of a young girl, and working on making sure that they have access to high quality education in the 21st century, we will solve that problem.
So I think we are moving to the end of our time here. I think there's a lot more that we could talk about that's really interesting. But our time is about up. We like to wrap up with a short series of questions, or short questions, and the idea is that the first thing that comes to mind, it's called, rapid fire. So ideally, you can give us your answer right away.
Let's try.
Yeah. What is one item that you own that you would never sell?
My guitar.
What is your most unusual skill?
Flying a drone.
What's more important, strength, speed, or stamina?
Stamina.
Which historical figure do you most admire?
Napoleon.
What is your favorite season of the year?
Spring.
And when was the last time that you tried something new?
Today.
Team or single family?
Team.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Wine or beer? Wine or beer?
Wine and beer in summer.
And your favorite app?
Oh. Yeah, well, yeah.
Everything.
I mean, what can I say? I'm biased.
What's one thing on your bucket list?
There are so many. That's a tough one.
Any random bucket list?
Travel around the world.
And if you could have the attributes of any animal, what would that be? What would you choose?
Fire dragon. A fire dragon.
Fire dragon.
Yeah, that's my attribute.
Cristina, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for all that you shared. And really appreciate your insights, and hopefully we can also take some of these ideas and learn and grow from that as well.
Thank you very much, and I wish I could have come in and said, hey, we found it, like this is how we can solve it, but we are just getting started, and for me it is important to be in touch and to exchange and grow together and see what's going to happen. At least let's try. I believe that we have the moral duty to at least try, and it's a learning at the end of the day. So I thank you all very much for being here, and please do keep in touch. You'll find me on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, so don't hesitate. And hopefully we can share more activities and developments later on. Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
to the GM.